Now the zygomatic process is going to stick out to the zygomatic bone. And so that's going to be this bump right here. So it's a little bit smaller, but it's just coming off the body of the maxillary bone. So this is the zygomatic process of the maxillary bone. That's about the borders right there that sticks out. We can also see the alveolar process, which again are the teeth sitting in right here, this bony portion of it. Now looking at the inferior view from the mouth, we can see here's that incisive foramen, so the hole right here at the front of the mouth. And then we also see the palatine process of each maxilla. And so we'll just highlight one side here for it. But this whole thing is the palatine process of the left maxilla bone in this case. So all that right there. So that's what's forming the hard palate of our mouth, called the palatine process. Now looking at the eye orbit, we can also see the fissures. So the superior orbital fissure is going to be this space right here, whereas inferior is going to be a little bit smaller, and that's what we see right here. They almost form a V shape together in a real skull. Now working on the palatine bone, the horizontal plate is actually going to form the backside of the hard palate, but this is what you see from an inferior view. So when we looked at the actual palatine bone itself, the horizontal plate is what we are seeing of that bone, and it's actually going to dive upward into the skull. The perpendicular plate is going the opposite direction of the horizontal plate. It's going to be going superiorly, and it's going to branch off into two processes. The sphenoidal process, which goes posteriorly to the sphenoid, whereas the orbital process is going to go to the orbital region, and that's what you see at the anterior. So as we look at the palatine bone here, there's the horizontal plate right here, perpendicular plate going upward. The orbital process is coming to the anterior, and then going posterior is the sphenoidal process. We're actually going to move on to some of the features of the vomer bone. The conae are going to be the internal openings into the nasal cavity, so they're inside the skull. And then the ala are just going to be where the vomer bone actually sticks out, and they form really small, they look like wings on it. Those are called the ala. So as we look at the vomer bone here, again, the conae are going to be the internal openings to the nasal cavity. So we are currently looking at this picture sitting inside the skull. And if you trace the vomer bone here, where it kind of fans out here, these are the ala. Now the zygomatic bone is going to have a few processes. It'll also have a frontal process going to the frontal bone. It's going to meet up with the zygomatic process of the frontal bone. It'll have a temporal process that's going to go to the temporal bone and meet up with the zygomatic process of the temporal bone. And together, those two processes are going to form something called the zygomatic arch. Now, if you've kept up with Thunder basketball at all, if you'll remember Russell Westbrook when he had to wear a face mask, that's actually because he broke his zygomatic arch. And so that's the structure that is actually the temporal process of the zygomatic bone together with the zygomatic process of the temporal bone. They form an arch called the zygomatic arch. And the zygomatic bone is also going to have a maxillary process going to the maxillary bone. So as we take a look again, our zygomatic is here in blue. So we'll highlight a couple of structures here. So the frontal process is going to be this portion right here. You can see as that goes up to the frontal bone here. So we'll annotate that with an F for frontal process. We can also see coming from the body here, this small little extension right here going up to that suture, which is the temporal process of the zygomatic bone. So we'll annotate that with a T.